Welcome back. This is episode 5 of the VR150 underhood compressor install on the F550 diesel. This is the episode where we actually get to start installing the compressor portion. Up until this point, we've been modifying components, tearing down, putting coolers in, tearing down different hoses, taking things off the truck. But this is actually the point where we actually start to reassemble everything. So in this video, we're going to get to see a bunch of different components. You're going to see the compressor itself, the idler brackets, main bracket, putting the alternator back in, etc. There is a lot going to go on in this video. This video is probably going to be fairly long. I can't promise you'll be able to see all of it, but we'll do our best to get it in everywhere you can actually see it with a camera. As discussed in the introduction, you're going to see multiple components. I tried to lay most of them out on the workbench to get an idea of what we're actually looking at today. So here's the actual compressor portion, or the air end. There's your bracket, your idler brackets. It's going to go in. That's your crank pulley, obviously factory alternator, and then your main bracket, and the alternator sits inside of it. I went ahead and laid the bolts out. As you can tell, this will be for your crank. This will be for your main bracket. And these are for the compressor. These are not marked, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Alright, main bracket. It's the main VMAC bracket. Alternator. Set it up where one tab is towards you. Okay, so one ear is towards you, one's up into, 10 or 11 o'clock. Take the bracket. It only fits in one way. See here and here. Set it on. If you don't do it that way, you will fight that bracket. I set the thing on a socket when I'm putting it in. It's still a little tough to get put in position sometimes. But once you have it up in here, you can maneuver it around. Make sure that bushing is pushed all the way down, which I did not do this time, which is probably what my holdup is here. You really don't want to hit it with any hammers or anything, unless you have to, but it should fit pretty tight in there. I'll get that put in, and you're going to reuse the factory alternator bolts, except you're going to be adding a blue Loctite to them. You can go ahead and once you get it in there, you can go ahead and put these in, tighten them up. I think they're 15 millimeter, and then the bracket's ready to be put on the engine. As we discussed when we were tearing down in the first episode, here's the bolts with a little rubber bushing on them. Go ahead and put Loctite on them. And I do that so like when I carry them over, they're already there. Make sure the bushings are on every bolt. Okay, this is where those bolts come in. These are the factory ones off the factory bracket. They will be reused in the VMAC bracket. Alright, so these are ready to be put in. It took a 15 millimeter for the alternator. I'm pretty sure it's a 13 millimeter for the actual main bracket. So we're going to go ahead and carry it over there, get the camera set up, and I'll show you how we put the main bracket in. I went ahead and modified. If you'll look, this page here at the bottom, and it talks about remove the upper bolt and secure the oil and cable of the primary water pump in preparation. I went ahead and done that, and I actually cut the plastic tray back into the bend, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. And the reason I do that is to make more room for the main bracket and the cables, so the cables don't touch anything. I also wrapped them in some heater hose like we talked about earlier, so you'll get to see that right before we put the main bracket on. Alright, we're set up over here on the truck. We have our bolt unhooked. I don't know if you can see this very well, but the bolt was removed from here. And then the cable tray was cut back, and then it's wrapped in a hose. And the reason we do this is because that main bracket's going to push down a little bit right here, and you don't want it rubbing the. I'm gonna go ahead and put this bolt back in while I'm thinking about it. I'll tighten it up later, but actually, I'll wait. I'll get it done after the bracket. So just push that down a little bit. Make sure everything's out of the way. You got your Loctite on your bolts. Since it's aluminum, it's not terribly heavy, but the alternator does help add some weight to it for sure. What I do is I just get a couple of the bolts lined up. I try to start with the center one because it essentially becomes the pivot. You want to start them all by hand. You can take the gun to run them up and snug them, but make sure you torque these. These will be the ones that you use the torque chart for. Once your bracket is torqued in place, the main bracket just put in, you can go ahead and reconnect your alternator, which just pull your harness up behind the main bracket. Plug in the pigtail, turn the cable, and tighten it up. Alright, I went ahead and removed the idler and the stator mount out of the factory bracket and put them in. Sorry, I lost it on the camera here. But if you'll look here, there's two different locations you can mount the idler, the factory idler. You mind, this truck has a single alternator, so you're going to put it in a single alternator location. If you do have dual alternators and you were getting rid of one, then you did put it in a dual alternator location. Stator mount mounts straight above it here, and you can pretty much tell the difference between the two. The stator mount is a 12 millimeter socket, and the idler is a 15 millimeter, and make sure you apply blue Loctite to both those. Once you've got both of those put on, now is usually the time to go ahead and put your power steering pump back on. And if you recall, it's got those 3 bolts, all about the same length, that are 10 millimeter. Look like this right here. Again, apply blue Loctite to them. Now, this particular pump can be a bit of a bear to get into the bracket sometimes. It's only going to fit one way, and getting it in there, it can be a little bit of a bear sometimes. So be patient with it. Don't go to pushing on it too hard. The bracket is cut out for it. You just got to get it kind of wiggled in the right spot. Start all 3 of your bolts and then tighten them up together. Alright, before we go ahead and put the air compressor on, we're going to have to remove the intake first. Now, the reason I want to show this on video is 2 things. One, these bolts are different lengths. So this is something to remember. Just bury in your minds. If you put the wrong length bolt in the wrong spot, you stand the potential of cracking the housing. You do that, VMAC is not going to cover it. Go ahead and take your intake off. What I found is easy is just leave the bolts in it. Leave the bolts in it. Set it off to the side. Set it on something clean. Alright. Grab you any kind of towel. What I do is I got a little bit of a cleaner here, and I just wipe the oil residue off the outside. And the only reason I'm doing that is so the tape will stick to it. Now you can take the gasket out, you can leave the gasket in there. That's totally your choice. You do not want trash getting in this though. So it's highly important that you tape this up and cover it. Again, putting a rag down there is nice. You do not want anything inside of it though. When you look at the cost of an air compressor system, the air end's about, I don't know, 60 to 80% of that cost. So do what you can to keep this protected. keep the trash out of it and it'll last you forever. I do it both ways just to make sure it's got good coverage. Especially if you're going to have to leave this overnight, or if you don't get done or something. So, Aaron's covered. Next is our bolts. You can see, I went ahead and applied the Loctite to them. There's 4 bolts. And as you can tell, one's a different color and a different length. So, the 3 long ones go here, and then the 1 short one goes here. When you go to install this, you don't have to put all the bolts in it for now. You can put 2 of them in it, whatever works best for you. What I found is when I pick it up, I put my thumbs on here and here, and those are the 2 bolts that I use to line it up. So when I pick it up, I'll actually push on those bolts, find the holes, and then thread them in. Let's see if I can do this without cutting the camera off, because I'm only going to do it once. Take your finger, find the hole where it's going to go. Okay. Fight me a little on this one. Now, because this bracket's used on multiple compressors, there is multiple holes, so be careful. Once you get a couple threads started, take you a breather if you need to. You want to make sure that you're holding up Alright, a little hard to focus on this. You're going to be removing the factory crank bolts, which look like this. It's a 12-point socket, 18 millimeter. You're going to take all those out and discard them. Okay, that come out of the factory pulley. You can get a 1/2-inch impact gun in there if you need to. A 3/8 will normally do it. Take them out, they're not too bad. Now, what you're going back with is a 6-point, 19 millimeter. Okay. Go ahead and put Loctite on these. This is my preference. Some people say you don't because of the way these bolts are going to be torqued. There is a specific torque rating for this. Okay, so when you go to put these bolts back in, we're going to torque them at 22 foot-pounds. And then after they're all torqued down, then we'll go around and do another 90 degrees on each one. Alright, put the fan stator in. Everybody remembers this piece we modified. The good news is we don't have to rotate it in there anymore. Since it's cut open and makes it a little bit easier to put in. Sometimes it's still easier to get behind it. The rubber piece has to go behind the plastic piece, if that makes sense. So the rubber piece goes behind the lower fan shroud. Once you get it in place, you'll know when it's in place. Two holes at the bottom are going to line up. All your studs are put in. Go ahead and snug it up. The only reason you'd have to take this back off is if you didn't trim enough off of it. And you'd have to modify it a little bit. If that happens, you only take 4 of them off. It's a 14 millimeter. Put them back on. Surprising enough, I do not put Loctite on those. I grabbed a 14. Okay, I lied to you. 15 millimeter. Don't knock everything off the shelf. It's a 15 millimeter to put this thing back on. Alright, modified fan stator is in currently. Now, with the modified fan stator in, you can see what this opening is for now, right? Now is where we put the crank pull in, the VMAC crank pull. It goes on top of the other ones. Here it is. Something to pay attention to, this little nipple here. There's a recessed hole inside the crank. Take some Scotch-Brite or sandpaper. Me, I use Scotch-Brite, and just clean it up because it's going to be rusted, pretty much guaranteed. But you want this thing to fit in there, and you want the holes to line up too. And if we cut it right, so go in here. What we do, again, take one bolt, stick it in here. Once you find one hole, the rest should line up pretty easy. Put 2 bolts in it. That means it'll be pretty much square. Once you have 2 bolts in it, you can either snug it down or not. But you want to check your clearance on both sides at the bottom. So that's the clearance that matters. And this one looks good. check them all a couple of times to make sure they're there. It's hard to see all. Right. Once they're there, then you want to get out your angle meter. Excuse me, torque angle meter. Let me grab that and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, here's what your torque angle meter looks like. Okay. See, there's a dial face on it. There's multiple ones like this out there. Let's see if I can get the camera to focus. This is a, who knows how old this thing is. 100 years probably, knowing me. Put it on, your socket on the bottom of it. Torque wrench on top here, or any kind of wrench now. And you'll connect this to something that's going to hold it in place. So say we connect it here, and once it's on the bolt, then we loosen this. Okay, and let's say we set it on there and it's stuck at 110. Well, you can loosen this, turn it to 0, clamp it down, and then when you rotate it 90 degrees, you're done. So that's what it means by going additional 90 degrees. There's plenty of ways of doing this. Luckily, 90 degrees is pretty easy to figure out. This is the most accurate method to use. All right, after we got our crank pulley installed, next one is to put this bracket on. Can't get a picture of it here. Okay, instructions say to take all these off, which you do have to do. What makes it easier, just take this one off to start. And the reason I say that, it makes it easier so you don't get them mixed up which pulley goes where. Okay, set the one off, set it to the side. Then you have 3 bolts that are labeled main bracket and a fastener back. And they look like this. And we put some Loctite on them. A little Loctite on all 3 of those. Set this down in here. Let me get these torqued in. Alright, once you do that, now is really the best time to go ahead and start pulling every one of those pulleys off. You can do it one at a time, you can do them all at the same time, whatever works best for you. I do apply Loctite to all of them, including the idlers. Just a little blue, don't be putting red or anything on it. Idlers are a wear item, like everything else. They will eventually wear out. Put a little Loctite on this one. I will say it is faster if you take them all off at one time, but I wanted to show you that You can mix these things up too, and then it's not quite going to work as designed with the belt. Pull the tensioner off as well. Alright, you got all your pulleys, brackets. Time to put the VMAC belt on. Next, we're going to install the actual belt. Here's the belt routing diagram in the manual. It also comes with a sticker of the kit. But pay close attention to the routing. You can get it on multiple ways sometimes. But pay close attention to it, it'll go on just fine. A lot of times what'll help if you'll take these belts out of the little box they're in the day before and put a wrench or something on them and just hang them on the wall. It'll start to straighten out. It won't be all tied in knots. Makes your life a little easier when it comes time to put it on. Into the Loctite. First place we can go is underneath the tensioner, over this idler, over the compressor, it's not my light now. On top of the other idler, smooth idler, and then back on the bottom, the rib idler. I can turn this light in, let's see. Can you see that on the camera? Make sure it's locked in the grooves. Crank is the place that's usually off a tooth. You can crawl underneath and look at the bottom of the crank if you need to. Just make sure it feels like it's in the center of the pulley. Next, you want to remove the pin out of your tensioner. Put tension on it. Pull the pin. And drive belt is complete. Alright, this is normally where the book tells you to stop. However, I've never understood why I stop here and go put the tank in. So what I normally do is go ahead and put the fan and the fan hand harness and the fan spacer in, and then sometimes even the upper radiator shroud, just to go ahead and close in this portion of it. There's really no value in leaving it open. I'll try to reposition this where you can see it. Here's our fan spacer. Okay, it's actually labeled. That's going to be the spacer for the clutch harness, and that's the bolt that goes over, or the washer that goes over the bolt here. So like I said, these kits are very detailed. They're going to come with just about every single component you need to make it work. And although this causes controversy sometimes, I put blue Loctite on the fan too. I do not want to be liable for ever having the issue of it coming loose and going through one of these nice aluminum hoods. So this, again, that's my way of doing it. To each their own. You can spin it on the fan first and then put it on. It's normally how I do it. But it's not going to make a difference either way. Fan on. Once you get it started, just spin it on by hand. And then that'll spin it onto the water pump as well. Alright, take your tool, or this thing, stick it in 2 of the holes on the water pump fully. Take your 1 7/8. Put some beef behind it and call it a day. Now we're gonna hook up our harness. All right, take your spacer here. Put your washer on your bolt through the spacer. Well, actually, spacer goes, then you put the harness in. A little bit of blue Loctite, that's probably way too much. And that should be a 13, which I don't have out here right now. Tighten that bolt up. Plug your connector in. Just a locking tab down. And make sure it gets zip tied back to this little bracket here. Put in the upper fan shroud. Keep in mind it has been modified. You'll see why here shortly. And if you'll follow along, you remember why I got this notch out here. You can see why it was going to be beneficial to do it. I think that was the last episode. Can't remember now. This locks into the lower shroud. You don't want to get it misaligned. Make sure when you're pushing it in, you reach over. These are 10mm. Tighten them up and you're good to go. I want to thank you guys for watching. As always, thanks for watching. Comment below. Let me know if you have any questions.